There was some equipment trouble at the last Pitchy and Powers taping, which is why it hasn't been finished, and we'll be finishing taping that tomorrow. So if you're looking for more of my friends Matt, who hates anime, and Louis, they'll be back tomorrow. But this evening I happened to go see Mamoru Hosoda's most recent film, Mirai, which turns out to have been in Australia before anywhere else, so no idea when we're getting the Masaki Yuasa film, but hey, here we go. It's a magic realism slice-of-life film about a 3.5 to 4.5-year-old boy who has a new baby sister, and he doesn't like her, and then he meets a bunch of people from his past, and also his younger sister from the future, and grows as a person along the way. Should I bother with spoilers? I think I should. I think the crux of whether discussing spoilers is relevant or not in reviewing something is whether the text has big pin drop moments where it recontextualizes information or has big reveals that will change the way that you're thinking about what you're seeing. Whereas this is one of those films like And Only Yesterday or A Millennium Actress, to use recent examples from the Pals cast, of a film that's far more about the journey rather than the destination. That's not to say that the destination doesn't matter, but rather that it's already quite a foregone conclusion by things that are set up very early on in the film that, hey, this kid is being a selfish brat, and he's probably going to learn something about how he should not be a selfish brat. Which he does. And that's fine. This film was quite relatable for me at the moment because I currently have a nephew who is in that age range and has some very similar patterns of behaviour, and is also very much into trains, much like Kun is in this film. There's lots of scenes of him just playing with the trains, or parents walking in at a point where they're frustrated with how selfish he is, and then seeing that the entire floor has been set up with a reassembled train track. That is a thing I have walked in on multiple times over the last couple of years. A key part of this film putting the real in magic realism is how well it depicts the parents of little Kun, because they are both seen as just people who are trying to do their best, still fumbling with what they're doing now that they've had a second child. The mum is trying to get back into the workforce to pay bills. The father's trying to be more engaged with the family and how to actually be a parent, so he has this little journey of working out how to better handle his children and balance all the actual house tasks, which was something he just took completely for granted before, while the mother is trying to work out how to be a bit less visibly agitated, I guess would be a way to put it, less prone to snapping in the way that her mother did at herself when she was younger. And that's all good. What's particularly nice about the way they're depicted is there's a lot of good visual acting in depicting just how exhausted you are when you're raising children. They're consistently tired and frustrated. There's moments where they snap and are not the sort of ideal movie parents that you would want normally in a film to depict ideal parenthood and positive parenting. There's moments where they slip up and it doesn't linger and say, hey look, they've screwed up. It's just, yeah, we get it when you're trying to work and you're dealing with kids and a dog and everyone is crying and one kid's trying to hit a newborn baby and you've gotten no sleep. You're just gonna want them all to shut up, and so you can just nod off for a bit. There's even a bit where early on in the film where the mum is breastfeeding the new little sister, and she's pretty much asleep the entire time it's happening. So that's all nice. And I think nice is probably the right adjective to describe this film. I don't think it's the most amazing film I've ever seen. I don't even think it's Hosoda's best. I like it more than Summer Wars, but I was in a pretty bad place when I first saw that film, so it's always had an impact on how I read that text. But I'm still undecided on how I feel about the inclusion of Kun's younger sister in her teens in scenes earlier in the film. And to really unpack why? So, the climax of the film essentially builds to 2 points, which are Kun needs to respect that his younger sister is a person who is worth looking after and caring for, And at the same time, it ties us into a question of self-actualization for a young child of, who are you? And the answer, rather the way he comes to the answer of who he is, which isn't, hey, I'm going to just list my first name and last name, but rather, I am the child of my parents, and they're the children of their parents, and I am in turn the older brother of this child, is he meets various people from his past and sees a bit of what their lives were like at various points. He meets his mother when she was about 6. He meets his great-grandfather, who recently deceased, about a year after he came back from the Second World War, and he's got an injured leg, and he has little moments along the way of learning things about life and himself as he meets these people. But in introducing someone who's from the future, I feel it kind of gets in the way of helping the audience go on the same journey of understanding who you are in relation to where you've been and the people who helped bring you to that point in the first place. And I think it also kind of cheats in presenting his arc of learning to treat his younger sister as a person as well, because he's already got this framework of seeing that she is a person in the future and is a person that can talk to him in the now through the magic. Whereas I would have preferred if the film had just used people from the past, and it's through those past experiences that he then grades an understanding, this baby is also a person. What also makes this a bit of a shame is that the film does something really neat early on, where the first character that Kun meets is an anthropomorphized version of the family dog, which is a cute little scene, having this grouchy middle-aged man presenting himself as the dog. The scene's a bit weak in that it has one of those Japanese family movie moments where the kid's experiencing jealousy and then a character says, "You're experiencing jealousy. Here's what it means." Rather than letting the kid in the audience work this out through something a little bit more subtle, but it's an all-ages film and that sort of thing's just gotta happen. But there is a cute moment where he's realizes it's the dog, so he grabs a ball and throws it, and you see this middle-aged man with this very straight expression on his face, eagerly running towards the ball, because that's what you do when you're a dog. That's cute. And the other neat thing is, the dog is very well animated and expressive in scenes before this point, but it's usually hanging around the edges of the frame as just a little detail in establishing the scene. But once you've gone through that process of seeing the dog actually personified, you're then inherently going to be paying more attention to the dog in later scenes, and seeing, now that you understand that it is also a sentient character and player in this piece, you're going to look to its reactions to get some gleaning of what its thoughts are on what's happening around, and through that, because that's happened, you've conditioned the audience to be looking at characters for their reactions. And what you can then do is then cut to reaction shots of Mirai more frequently. And that way you're telling the audience, yes, she's a person. And that way you're giving the hints to Kun that she's a person, without literally having a future version of her coming and saying, "Hi, I'm a person." So I feel like it does something really clever, but then doesn't utilize it in a way to really accentuate some of the themes that it's going for. While I'm there on things around the frame, a neat detail as far as the character backstories go is the father of the family is an architect, and he's got an interest in Frank Lloyd Wright, which is demonstrated nice and subtly through background imagery. And they live in a house that he has designed, which the grandmother grumbles about in pretty much the first scene of the film, and it leads to just having this really nice creative design for a living space that the characters can be in, even though it's just mundane life for the most part. Which leads to just some really nice positioning in the frame of characters doing things, like Kun will be messing around with the box in like the upper right corner, which is not usually a position that you would see a child doing that sort of action in. It's just that he's on a different terrace of this house, rather than in a precarious location. It leads to this nice sense of, like, his heightened sense of importance in contrast to the things that his mum is doing. The great thing about Japan is that it has a well-functioning public transport system with heavy use of trains, which means that trains frequently pop up in the imagery of Japanese texts. It's mentioning here because the climax of this film is set in a train station. It makes sense because Kun is interested in trains. As part of the questions of who he is, him being lost in a train station full of people is a great way of conveying that. And it's approaching the point that I think this phrase is going to have to become a running gag on the Pitchy and Powers cast, because given that this is a climax that's all about asking who he is, and the fact that who he is someone who is related to others, it means that once again, the semiotics of the train station are, it's a place of transition and change. So, I feel like I'm just going to have to bring that up anytime there's anything remotely related to trains in anything that we watch, regardless of whether that's actually what's being said or not. But this does remind me of how there's a YouTube channel called What's So Great About That. I think the editor's name is Grace Holly? Certainly her first name's Grace. She's fantastic. And she put a piece on birds in film, in particular birds in horror, this week, and was making a comment about how birds are quite consistently used for feelings of intimidation and predation, even when it's not a horror film. And so, the semiotics of the train are quite often this limbo land before a point of transition. So that's used again here! I guess I should mention some things about the actual animation itself. It's good, it's expressive, it conveys the information it needs to, it's good to look at. It's, for the most part, the backgrounds are pretty much photorealistic. There's a couple of egregious CG shots involving vehicles, which are a bit of a disappointment, but that's kind of the norm until the Japanese animation industry is able to pay people for longer periods of development. There's a big crowd shot in the train station at the climax, which is mostly CG. That works for helping bring the next level of surrealism and confusion that occurs at that time, and culminates in a very strange cartoon man operating a lost and found desk. So that leads to, if the train station is the point of transition for theme and narrative, it's also a point of transition in art style to get you prepared for some weirder moments. That's neat. What isn't neat is once the climax has happened, the Kun's younger sister, future self, pops up again and says, "Hey, we've got to look through your family records to prove that you are who you are." It leads to a moment where they're flying along a large set of family trees, which is very evocative of how the internet was depicted in Summer Wars. So it feels like this is an aesthetic that Hosoda likes to do, and that's fine. But the way it's introduced is this nice little, hey, now that he has worked out who he is, they're flying up, and hey, it's like, hey, we're gonna whisk away, get that sense of freedom now that you know who you are, and then go back to your life. But then his sister says, "No, we gotta go to the oak tree that's in the middle of your house, because that's where the family tree's laden." And it would be fine to be running a family tree with a literal tree recurring visual thing, but the film doesn't really build to this moment. It doesn't. The tree is always in shots, but the frame isn't built around centering the tree as part of your focus, and shots of the tree are not tied to any of the narrative beats that are related to this theme of your position in your family being a part of who you are. So it just comes out of nowhere, and then leads to this sequence of him then seeing some more glimpses of his family members at various points in their life, or you learn a little bit more about each of them, which is fine, but it feels like it's a bit out of order, and that it would have been better to have a bit more time meeting each family member. So then when he gets to this climax, it's Kun then working out, hey, these are all people and they've done things and that has impacted who I am, and so now I know who I am. Feels like it should be the pin drop moment, not something that you use to fill in the blanks after he's already had that moment. And that was annoying. It feels like it's kind of like it's there as part of a wind-down period now that we've had a climax, but there isn't enough intensity in the climax in the first place to really warrant that much wind-down time. Indeed, one of the tensest moments in the entire film is fairly early on, when Kun, being particularly annoyed at his younger sister, decides to hit her in the head with one of his toy trains. And if you know anything about how soft the human skull is in newborn babies, and the potential risks of damage that you can have for shaking or disturbing a baby like that is a very scary moment. And it leads to a good, chaotic follow-up where just everyone starts crying and getting mad. Which is good, but that's way more tense than anything in the climax, which I think I'm going to have to chalk up to as a flaw of the film. And that's kind of inevitable when your protagonist is a 3.5 to 4.5 year old boy, is that, or more specifically, having a 3.5 to 4.5 year old boy operating in an entirely metaphorical and dream state for where his climax is occurring, as the way that you're going to feel the fear of a child is if they are in genuine danger and genuine places of isolation. Because if you've ever been a parent, or you've been responsible for children, it is terrifying to know the things that can happen to a kid. Or even to just think about the things that can happen when they are actually, by themselves, completely exposed to the world. But when it's an entirely metaphorical situation like this, and the scariest thing that's happening is someone saying, "Do you know who you are?" That's not going to have the sort of impact that potentially some real damage occurring to a real person because of some real ignorance by a child. All that said, I think I would recommend seeing this film. As far as films about relationships go, I'm going to say that for 2018, Liz and the Bluebird and definitely Makio are better than this. But it's nice to see Hosoda making something different. I guess he's going back to some temporal shenanigans like The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, but that's been long enough ago that it's a fine time to look back at this. It was nice to have a perspective this much about really petty, actual child concerns. It's nice to have some varied perspectives. So, check it out. If you're in Australia, it's on for another few days. If you're outside Australia, it's popping up in some months over the coming rest of the year. And that's about it. So there will be a Palscast taping tomorrow. And that'll go up either late Sunday night or Monday morning, most likely. And then we'll see if I can get something more concrete and visual complete by the end of the month. Thanks for listening. Rate, comment, subscribe. Click on the bell. Make sure that you get all Pitchy and Pals content straight to your bell icon because the YouTube algorithm takes them away from your front page. Amen.